Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on regions, cities, and industries from a financial geography perspective, insights from the Atlas of Finance. My name is Franziska Sohns, Associate Professor in Economic Geography at Anglia Ruskin University, and I will be sharing today's session. This webinar is hosted by the Regional Studies Association, which for those of you who attend one of these events for the first time, is a global community of academics, policymakers, and practitioners focused on advancing the understanding of regional issues. The Regional Studies Association supports its members by providing access to the latest resources, such as research funding, networking, and publishing platforms. It also offers space to advance research, foster career development, and facilitate knowledge exchange, including events like this. Before I start, I would like to say a couple of words concerning housekeeping. First of all, please be aware that this session is being recorded and will be made available on the Regional Studies Association's website and app after the event. Also, if you have any questions during this session, please type them in the chat box and start each question with a Q so that we can easily identify them. And finally, for those of you active on social media, please use the hashtag RSA webinar to tweet about today's event. Well, now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker to you, Professor Dariusz Wójcik. Professor Wójcik, or as I will refer to him throughout the session, Darek, is currently a professor of financial geography at the National University of Singapore and also an honorary research associate at the University of Oxford. While specializing in financial geography, he has published widely in human geography, urban studies, finance and economics, and political economy. Darek published several notable books, such as the New Oxford Handbook of Economic Geography, International Financial Centers After the Global Financial Crisis and Brexit, Sticky Power, Global Financial Networks in the World Economy, and most relevant for today's session, the Atlas of Finance, Mapping the Global Story of Money. In addition to his research and publications, he is also the chair of the Global Network on Financial Geography, editor-in-chief of the journal Finance in Space, and a fellow of both the Academy of Social Sciences and the Regional Studies Association. Before I hand over to Darek, I would like to share some of my own thoughts on today's topic. Well, finance, as we know, is a necessary resource for growth of regions, cities, and industries. However, it is also a system that links human activities with the environment. This is illustrated by Darek through visualization from the recent published Atlas of Finance, which is part of the University of Oxford's Our World in Data project, which uses data visualization to explain the big trends in our world, and finance is no exception. As noted by the Irish Times article recently, atlases once held a significant place in the world of books, but they declined with the rise of the internet. However, they are now making a comeback, and the Atlas of Finance represents this revival. To conclude, I would like to share a brief personal story that illustrates why sharing this webinar is particularly special for me. As a child, around 7 years old, I received my very first children's atlas, and I spent, according to my mother, countless hours sitting in front of it. Naturally, my mother got worried by how unusually quiet I was in my room, as me being quiet as a kid and also as an adult is often a sign of mischief. So she came in and checked on me. When she asked what I was up to, I confidently replied, well, I'm studying the maps to find the best places to discover gold and oil so we can finally get rich. Now, while I might have slightly overestimated a small town girl's ability to fund and launch a mining operation, it does illustrate something important: the incredible power of maps to inspire curiosity and critical thinking, not only in children, but in all of us. With this in mind, I'm excited to hand over to Darek, who will be taking us on a journey through time and space, showing how finance intersects with the development of regions, cities, and industry. Please join me in welcoming Darek.
Thank you so much, Franziska, and thank you to RSA for hosting us. And thank you for sharing the story, Franziska. I'm a small town boy, so it resonates with me and with my love for atlases, which I will share with you today. Just to explain my attire. So I'm in Singapore, so the only top I could be wearing is a t-shirt, and it's a special t-shirt of Finance and Society journal. So the new journal that was created by Regional Studies Association and the Global Network on Financial Geography, where we both come from with Franziska. So please read. We have a lot online already, and submit your best work to finance and space. And this is also what I'll talk about today: finance and space, financial geography. So let me share my screen. I hope you can see it well now. And true to the title of this webinar series, I want to talk about regions, cities, and industries, just to make sure I don't disappoint anyone interested in the series. But I want to talk about from a financial geography perspective. So I'm going to tell you what I understand as financial geography. And then I want to give you illustrations, literally colorful illustrations from Atlas of Finance. You can see the cover. It's available in bookshops now, not in Singapore yet. I don't think it's arrived in Singapore into bookshops, but should be available in the UK and obviously online. So financial geography has a simple definition. I like simple definitions. I think they should be clear and simple, because otherwise they're not doing their job. So financial geography, surprise, surprise, concerns relationships between finance and space. But this relationship or relationships work at least two ways. Obviously, money and finance influence space and geography. Yeah? We need money, investment to build things, cities, sustain industries and regions. So one side of financial geography is this financial production of space. But there is the other side, which focuses on space and geography influencing, shaping how money and finance works. And that's what we call the spatial production of finance. Let me explain it with an example. The first map I'm going to show from the Atlas of Finance. So this map concerns credit scores. Credit scores are used to evaluate creditworthiness of individuals like you and me. Almost all adults in the United States, at least, have a credit score. People with low credit score are called subprime credits, yeah, or subprime borrowers. Well, in fact, because they subprime, they can hardly borrow, and if they borrow, they have to pay very high interest. So this map uses the most influential credit score in the US and shows that for each county, and as you can see on the map, some of the counties have very square borders and shapes. It shows you the percentage of population with subprime credit rating, okay? So the more intensive, the more red the color, the higher the percentage of subprime population. In many counties, more than a quarter of the population are subprime. with no or very limited access to credit of any kind. Yeah, and we can see the concentration of subprime population in the historical Black Belt. Yeah, particularly in the state of Mississippi, where some counties have half of the population subprime. Huge concentration can also be found in counties with a large percentage of Hispanic population, immigrants, yeah, like the borderlands of Texas. And then we also find a lot of subprime population in the West, yeah, and these are actually big counties which are Indian reservations. So these are the three groups of concentrated subprime disadvantage in the US. So I use this map as an example of the spatial production of finance, yeah, because obviously these credit scores are influenced by the geography of inequality and poverty in the US. They reflect inequality and poverty. But you also have to think about the extent to which low credit scores or credit scores in general shape inequality and poverty. Yeah, because once you're poor for whatever reason, within or beyond your control, you may easily find yourself in the trap of poverty if you can get credit. It is at a high interest rate, which can basically put you and make you drown in debt very quickly. So it's both the spatial production of finance and financial production of space at work. A few words about the background of the Atlas of Finance. So why did we start working on an Atlas of Finance? Why am I excited about it? Because there has been no Atlas of Finance to date. Yeah, the answer is simple. There are atlases of almost anything you can think of, yeah, in your bookshop. There is an atlas of beer, very important. Franziska is an expert on beer industry. I mean, professionally, scientifically, of course. There are atlases of bells, places that don't exist, obviously coffee, phantom atlas, cursed places, dinosaurs, fairies, monsters, ghosts, anything you can think of. But until now, there has been no Atlas of Finance. So, well, you could ask, well, there hasn't been any, but maybe nobody needed any. Yeah, why? And the question is, why isn't there any? So, well, we could speculate about reasons. Yeah, some of these things I mentioned, like fairies, as far as I know, rather intangible and invisible. So the fact that finance is intangible shouldn't be a sufficient explanation for there being no Atlas of Finance to date. But my general explanation is there has been no Atlas of Finance because money and finance are seen as arcane. Yeah? Very complex, very difficult to understand, best left to experts, and described in equations. Yeah, so equations like this, you can see in white here in the background of this warning sign. This is a formula for value at risk used at finance. So such formulae require understanding of statistics, calculus, yeah, often advanced mathematics. So here in this graphic in the Atlas, we explain how the notion of risk and the measurement of risk has changed in the history of finance. We also show the hubris in the financial industry when the industry thought they could actually measure risk precisely and therefore avoid it. One of such companies was Long-Term Capital Management in the 1990s, a very successful hedge fund in the US, which employed, among others, Nobel Prize winners in economics. And then in 1998, it went bust because all the risks they were calculating with the most sophisticated mathematics didn't pan out as they saw them. So returning to the question why we need an atlas of finance. There are many reasons, but one most relevant, I think, to this event is that an atlas, like maps in general, but particularly collections of maps with a purpose, help us see new patterns. Yeah? When we map things, we can see new patterns. Patterns of what? Among other things, regions, cities, and industries. And let me say a bit more historically about the significance of seeing patterns unseen before. So this is not a map from that we created in the atlas, but we use it there. I think it's extremely important. So this map of the world comes from what is considered the first modern atlas. The title was a beautiful title in Latin, Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, okay, theater of the whole world. Ambitious title. The creator of the atlas was Ortelius. Ortelius lived in Antwerp, today a Flemish Belgian city. He lived there in late 16th century. Okay, this is when he created the atlas in the 1570s. Now, the context, geographical and historical, are important because, in my view, the creation of one of the most important atlases in the history was only possible in a place that was a thriving financial center, as Antwerp was. Antwerp was the leading European financial center in the 16th century. Okay, so why in Antwerp? Well, it had a lot of talent, like people like Ortelius. It was in Antwerp that Ortelius could meet other great thinkers and artists, creative people like Albrecht Dürer or Gerard Mercator, or painters, Flemish painters like Bruegel or Rubens. Yeah, they lived and many of them traveled to Antwerp. Antwerp was a trading hub. In Antwerp, there was enough money to pay for a production of an atlas. There were many publishing companies. Because there were many publishing companies and because Antwerp was not controlled in the 16th century by any single empire, Antwerp was also relatively free of censorship. So free thinking and creativity could flourish. And one of the fruits was this atlas. So one way in which we're talking about a pattern we cannot see is the observation that the history of cartography and geography and the history of finance are joined at the hip, yeah, throughout history. Most of the important maps and specifically atlases, particularly atlases, were created in leading financial centers because they take a lot of talent, they take a lot of resources, and they take a degree of freedom of thinking and creativity to be produced. But there is a more literal sense in which I talk about patterns you cannot see because look at the Atlantic. Ortelius, the creator of this map, was one of the first people, if not the first person, who noticed in 1570s that the coastline, eastern coastline and western coastlines of the Atlantic suggest that Americas, Europe, and Africa were one continent before. And guess what? 350 years later, this observation was confirmed by geographical theory, yeah, the continental drift theory. So that's an example from the history of financial geography, well, cartography, which proves the significance of pattern identification of patterns, something that we must never underestimate in geography. So let's talk about regions, cities, and industries. And in fact, the story starts with the very origins of finance. Yeah, in the origins of finance, we can see the significance of regions, cities, and industries, and the significance of finance for them. So the origins of finance that we illustrate in the atlas go back over 5,000 years. Yeah, so this is the 4th millennium BCE in today's southern Iraq, in Mesopotamia, Sumer civilization on the rivers of Euphrates and Tigris. Okay, so what I mean by the origins of finance is illustrated with this artifact, which in real life is the size of a smartphone. So very handy. It's made of clay. It was written with a reed stylus and baked in the sun, but very durable. It turns out, clay, inscribed in this way in that climate. What does it say? What does it say, the clay tablet? Well, it talks about a delivery of over 130,000 liters of barley over a period of 3 years to a temple in Uruk to produce beer. So you may see the sign of something plant that looks like barley in something that looks like a bottle, and next to it something that is probably a brewery. In the left bottom corner, you can actually see the oldest signature in the world that we know of. The name is Kushim. Kushim was the priest and accountant in one person at a temple, a Ziggurat temple in Uruk. Uruk was perhaps the oldest financial center in the world, was also one of the oldest cities in one of the most ancient civilizations. Okay, so what we're talking about the origins of finance as an accounting and legal innovation at the same time, right? This was one of many clay tablets discovered in the ruins of Uruk, now covered with sand. But there are many other tablets related to this one. It's a system of tablets which show fields from which the barley was to come, showed the calculation of yields from the barley fields, showed payments for barley with gold. Precious metals were used in Mesopotamia for wholesale payments. So it's financial innovation which comes at the same time as the oldest counting and writing system in the world. Yeah, once writing and counting were invented, the financial genie was out of the bottle, or out of a clay tablet. So let's talk more about regions. Yeah, we already had regions there. We have Sumer in the Middle East. We have finance and the origins of cities, and we have one of the oldest industries, the beer industry, based on agricultural surplus, allowing the functioning of cities. So this map shows you toxic loans in France, loans representing money borrowed by regions and municipalities in France. These loans, this money was borrowed over 20 years ago. This was the heyday of financial innovation in many ways. In France, it meant that big banks would go around cities and regions. The same was happening elsewhere in Europe, including Germany, selling financial products. You can borrow, money is cheap. We can show you the best way to borrow money. You have land, you have real estate, you can repay these loans. So a lot, and it was also accelerated by local elections in France in 2005. So local governments were very interested in fixing roads, building swimming pools for schools, improving infrastructure. All right. But the local governments paid little attention to the fact that most of these loans were connected to the exchange rate between the euro and the Swiss franc. And what happened was that after the Eurozone crisis broke out in 2009, 2010, Swiss franc went up and euro went down, okay? And suddenly these loans became much more expensive and repayments several times bigger. So what we see, I hope you can see it if I switch from the previous to this map quickly, you see how the number of spots on the map increases. So this is the epidemic of toxic debt in French municipalities and cities. So obviously what this meant was there are still many unfixed potholes and underfunded local governments in France. Many of them are still burdened with this debt. Staying with the failures of the euro, this is a map of regions, but regions of Europe. Yeah? And the map of EU countries or Eurozone countries shows you trade balances of these countries. So in red, you have countries with trade deficits mainly in Southern Europe, yeah, or European peripheries, if you like, including Ireland. And this is the state around, in early 2000s. And then in blue, you have countries with trade surpluses, with Germany and the Netherlands in the lead. So you see the core and the periphery of Europe painted with trade surpluses and deficits. This was a reflection of the fact that countries with deficits could not keep up with the competitiveness and productivity increases of the core economies. And this had huge implications after the euro was introduced. And interestingly, it's something that the financial industry and investors did not really appreciate until it was too late and the crisis broke out. So with this butterfly-looking line graph, you see on the left that before the introduction of the euro, countries like Portugal and Greece would have to pay much more interest for any money they borrowed, yeah, for sovereign bonds. With the introduction of euro, the delusion that set in financial markets was that, because we have now central bank system in Europe, all countries can be charged the same interest rate for what they borrow because they're part of one common currency area. Yeah, and this was the illusion that survived for nearly a decade. And then suddenly it turns out that these debts borrowed by countries falling behind in terms of competitiveness, not able to keep up with the core of the European economy, were so much in debt that they were on the verge of bankruptcy. Yeah, and this is where we see the interest rates skyrocketing, shooting up for the countries like Greece, Portugal, and Spain. This led to a series of bailouts, right? The most severe bailout was and crisis took place in Greece. So the bailout was agreed by the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank, and the European Commission to arrest the crisis and decline in Greece. The amount was over 200 billion euro. So this plot shows you the sources of this bailout funding from the left and the destinations on the right. And the orange kind of line, the only line on the right which is not white, is the only contribution of this bailout to the real economy, to people who were suffering from unemployment, for example, okay, or small businesses. Almost 80% of the money went to creditor banks in Western Europe that made bad decisions and lent. So basically, the troika of European and international institutions were helping themselves, most of all, helping some banks in Greece, and in a tiny way, directly trying to help people. But obviously, the official reason for the bailout and its title was, solidarity with Greece. And finally, for regions, I chose a map of Indian states of India. The map is on microfinance and two main financial instruments of microfinance in India. One illustrated with circles. These are the headquarters of microfinancial institutions that borrow money often from wholesale financial markets, from banks, and they lend in small amounts to people, to small businesses and households. With colors, different coloring of the states, from light red to dark red, you see the density, the intensity of the second microfinancial instrument in India, women's self-help groups. So for women only, millions of women are involved in India, and basically the women pool resources and lend to each other, okay? So we see that the geography of microfinance in India is far from trivial. It's really worth mapping. The biggest center of microfinancial institutions is not Mumbai, is Kolkata, right? And there are big centers, Bengaluru, Chennai in the south. We also see that the biggest concentration of microfinance in the form of self-help groups is not in the richest states of India, not in the most educated states of India, where the literacy rates are the highest, in the south, in the states like Kerala. The highest intensity of microfinancial activity is in Odisha. Yeah, so this is the darkest big state. Also in some states surrounding Bangladesh. Well, why? Because microfinance as an innovation was initiated in the 1970s in Bangladesh. Yeah. So we're looking at diffusion of microfinance as financial innovation. But there are also cultural factors and other factors at play. Cities, let's move to cities. So, well, you could be forgiven for thinking that the geography of financial centers can be a bit dull, because most leading financial centers in countries are capital cities of these countries, right? Warsaw in Poland, Paris in France, and so on and so forth. But there are very important exceptions, not only Germany. Here we illustrate these exceptions and what happened in countries like Australia, Canada, Brazil, India, and South Africa. So in these countries, over the last 100 plus years, we have witnessed a major shift of the leading financial center from one city to another. Yeah. In India, it was from Kolkata to Mumbai. In Australia, from Melbourne to Sydney. In South Africa, from Cape Town to Johannesburg. In Canada, from Montreal to Toronto. In Brazil, from Rio de Janeiro to Sao Paulo. And here we want to illustrate the why. Yeah, why these shifts happened. Well, they share one common reason, which is technology. First was the introduction of telegraph in the late 19th century, which meant that information no longer had to travel by ship, by sea. In the 19th century, when information had to travel by ship, Melbourne, for example, had an advantage over Sydney because ships from International Financial Center of London, the main hub of financial information, or from Europe in general, these ships would first arrive in Melbourne and took 2 more days to get to Sydney, which meant that by the time new information got to Sydney, it was pretty useless. It was already used by people in Melbourne. For example, the demand for wool going up or going down. And the same thing applies to the advantage of Cape Town in relation to inland Johannesburg, or the advantage of Montreal as a seaport over Toronto. Yeah, but telegraph is the first factor of change. Information can travel quickly through a cable. Yeah, the distance of 100, 200, 300 kilometers is not a big difference. Now, then what reinforced this technological change was obviously air transport. Yeah, the fact that not only information, but also people could travel faster and not by ship, okay? So again, this actually helped cities like Sao Paulo and Sydney and Johannesburg to grow. And the rest of the job was done by financial globalization in the late 20th century, okay, which really helped the new leading financial centers grow. And we illustrate this in the bar graphs and line graphs at the bottom of the map. So all these countries experienced quite similar shifts. When we talk about cities, we have to talk about the unaffordable housing. Must sound familiar to people in London or almost anywhere else. This is the case of Vancouver, one of the most acute cases of unaffordable property in the world. So here we want to illustrate, show how much hotter and redder this map of property prices in Vancouver got, just over 15 years, from 2006 to 2021. But on the little graphs and in the text, we show that actually in Vancouver, they did things to try to deal with it that would be controversial in many places and could never happen in many places. So one was a foreign buyers tax on foreign buyers of property. And the other was tax on vacant properties and speculative purchases of property. And actually, as the story shows, these two taxes had a big impact on cooling down the property market in Vancouver. Of course, the main source of immigration in Vancouver is China. Another thing that we pay attention to in the Atlas about China is the rise or potential rise of Chinese financial centers. Here we do it in this map or network graph by looking at syndication networks of activities of investment banks. Yeah, so these are high finance activities. So in 1993, New York, London, by far the biggest centers of these activities, connected strongly to each other. Yeah, a lot of deals are conducted jointly by bankers from both centers. By 2016, this activity grows hugely. Yeah, investment banking has grown. But what we see, there are a lot of new financial centers on the map, and the most prominent new centers are the Chinese financial centers. They are marked and their connections are illustrated with red color on the map. But we see that the size is nowhere near the size of the activity in New York and London. So there's this triangle there, Shenzhen, Shanghai, and Beijing. They connect with the rest of the world mainly via Hong Kong, but the triangle and Hong Kong are far from challenging the New York-London axis of global finance. And I included this graph because I thought that everyone in the UK in particular would miss this guy. So that's about London and Brexit. And obviously, many times in history, people speculated about shifts of financial centers. So when the European Central Bank was established in Frankfurt, many people said, wow, Frankfurt will become the leading financial center of Europe. Well, this never happened. After Brexit also, London hasn't really lost its power or much of its power as a leading financial center of Europe. So here we try to illustrate it by showing how much bigger in terms of employment, in terms of transactions, London is than any other financial center in Europe, and how London has this pull of its gravity, of its weight in the center of the European system of financial centers, which we illustrate like a solar system. Yeah, these are the forces of inertia. Finally, in industries, I will go quickly, time is running out. One industry is the corporate law, which bears a very heavy legacy of the British Empire. Yeah, the English common law is practiced in many countries, shown in red. But in light red, you have countries which host the offices of top 10 corporate law firms in the world. And guess what? All top 10 corporate law firms in the world are Anglo-American firms. Yeah, there is not a single firm which is headquartered outside of the UK or the US, and often they have joint headquarters. Yeah, so it's, if there is an industry which bears the legacy of the imperial era is the corporate law industry. Of course, there are new financial centers like Bengaluru. Foreign financial firms get there in two ways: offshoring or outsourcing. So subcontracting other firms, often Indian firms, to do things like not just call centers, but IT, accounting, and other services, or setting up branches. And here we show various firms, including Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, leading banks and insurance companies, setting up operations in Bengaluru. It's an industry which employs hundreds of thousands of people in Bengaluru. In the city in Poland where I studied, in Krakow, global business services of this kind are the single biggest employer. 70,000 people in a city of 900,000 people. And we see how offshoring and outsourcing of financial services has actually led to the growth of Bengaluru as a city. It's a major factor behind urban growth in that city. In the penultimate slide, I show industrial structure of Belt and Road Initiative investments. Yeah? And here the myth we want to bust with this map is the association of BRI with transport, yeah, railways and logistics. Transport is shown in red here. It's one of the smallest industries supported with BRI. Logistics is much bigger. It's shown with purple, but by far bigger industries supported through BRI policy are energy, utilities, and metals and mining. Yeah, it's a policy that fuels China in many ways. And of course, fintech is a new industry at the convergence of finance and technology, which is changing the financial landscape, but not in ways many people predicted. Many people would tell me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that I should give up studying financial geography and financial centers because they are history. It's not geography anymore, it's ancient history. So here on the map, we put traditional financial centers like London or Tokyo, Sydney, and we put a map of investments in fintech. And we see that traditional financial centers and fintech centers, they overlap largely. Yeah, that fintech investments are extremely concentrated in traditional financial centers like Sao Paulo and London and New York, and concentrated in technology centers like Silicon Valley with San Francisco, or Bengaluru itself, or Berlin. So basically what fintech means is that financial centers do not become less important. They become more important because they get bigger and there are more of them as a result. So yeah, instead of a concluding slide, I just show you the team that I always call the dream team. None of this would have been possible without these people, and each of them brought a different kind of expertise and experience to this work. So it was only possible because of the synergies. Thank you. Sorry, I ran out over time.
Thank you so very much, Darek, for this very insightful presentation. I really, really enjoyed it. And yes, I would like to open the floor to questions. So if anyone on this call has any questions, any comments, please don't hesitate to put them into the chat box. Just add a little Q in front of it so that we can identify it. Although we haven't gotten any questions yet, so I will assume everything that comes in now is actually a question. So please feel free and ask some questions. And while you are typing, oh, there is already a question. I thought I would have to ask a question to bridge the time. I don't. So let's have a look at the first question. Well, who is here? A question is, thank you for your inspiring speech. It's jumping. Thanks for your inspiring speech. I'm wondering, how does the geography of green finance change the financial landscape? Darek, do you want to answer the question?
Yes. Green finance and how does it change the financial landscape?
Yeah.
Oh, too little. One answer. I think green finance, sustainable finance is still niche. It may look big, but I think a lot of accounts of green finance are greenwashed themselves. So if you think like there are some accounts about sustainably invested assets, which are really inflated. So I think that's one problem. In terms of course, they are still extremely important. So I'm a skeptic, but I'm not an opponent of green financial innovation. In terms of the map, the landscape of financial centers, green finance, again, there is a lot of overlap between the geography of green financial innovation and the map of financial centers that we are familiar with. Yeah, with London in the center in particular. But there are innovations which change things, especially on the consumption side of green finance. So, for example, we're looking recently at blue bonds. So the kind of green bonds that are called blue because they focus on marine ecosystems, yeah, and the blue economy. And the first blue bond was issued for Seychelles, the government of Seychelles. Then one of the biggest, next biggest was issued by the Nordic Investment Bank headquartered in Helsinki and Stockholm. So obviously green finance offers also opportunities for innovation outside of the conventional centers of finance.
Thank you. There's another question, methodology. So Paula wonders, if you would recommend a specific methodology over another to understand the financial production of space in a specific city.
Yes, of course, it depends on what kind of financial production. Financial production of space is a very is a huge concept and phenomenon to study. So it really depends on what aspect of it you want to study, what sector, what group of people. But the first thing I would say is I'm a huge believer in mixed methodologies. And not just combination of interviews and data which never speak to each other, but actually using surveys as well that can be quantified and can even be used for forecasting things. And we have examples like that from factorial surveys that we've done with Franziska for a paper about the impacts of Brexit on London as a financial center. So I would encourage everyone to be creative about mixing qualitative, quantitative methods in very integrated ways. And because I also think that geography in particular is the best area, or I would say discipline, but it's the best. It's great because it's a discipline without too much discipline. So it's the best place for combining research methods. And I think, mixed methodologies should be embraced for that reason.
Thank you. There's another question in the chat, and it's about microfinancing in India. Let me try to summarize. So let me just read it. Thank you very much for the insightful presentation regarding microfinance in India. As you discussed, the less literate and poor states have the highest micro-lending in self-help groups. Does this denote that these poor states have low banking penetration and institutional setup levels, leading to a lack of proper finance agencies, adding, and this basically being the reason why peer-to-peer lending is more important? So is there a link of having like poor infrastructure banking-wise formally and these alternatives popping up?
Good point to some extent, but notice it's not necessarily the poorest states in India which have the highest microfinance penetration. So if you look at the map again, or please get a copy of the atlas, or the map is also on the website, Atlas website. It's one of the maps we use for publicity. So you will notice that many of the poorest states have little microfinance as well. So the correlation, if I may, the correlation is quite weak. It's neither negative nor positive between the level of economic development and the development of microfinance. Some of it has to do with the location. I mentioned diffusion from Bangladesh. Some of it has to do with really specific regional and local factors, often to do with historical accidents. The women's self-help groups that worked well, and they were popularized through local media. So it's a really fascinating geography to study. I know there are papers. My colleague here in Singapore, Carly Nichols, did some research on self-help groups in India.
Thank you, Derek. Another question is about contemporary geopolitics. So to which degree very recent crises, such as Ukraine, Israel, the pandemic, have affected the financial landscape, and to which degree this has been taken into consideration in the Atlas?
Yes, I didn't show you one map from the Atlas. It's a map of on weaponizing finance, and it shows the spread of financial sanctions. So financial sanctions become a financial weapon of choice in much more than trade sanctions or military sanctions for various reasons. Obviously, it's the weapon that is mainly in the hands of the United States because of the power of the US dollar. If you exclude companies, societies, whole countries from the use of US dollar, it gets difficult. Yeah, it gets difficult to participate in the global economy. Of course, there are ways around it, and people in finance find the ways around it. Like commodity traders who can get, oil out of any country to any country, whatever the sanctions are. We see that now with the sanctions on Russian oil or on Russia, and we've seen that before with sanctions on Iran and other countries. So you're absolutely right. Geopolitics is hugely important. Another side of it is obviously the rise of China. And here, financial sanctions, as those used by the US, often the EU as well, collaborating with the US, are a double-edged sword in global finance because the more they are used by the US and EU, the more countries in the region where I sit in Southeast Asia think that, well, what do we do not to become victims if something happens of such sanctions? Well, maybe we should diversify a bit, at least a bit, away from the US dollar, to other currencies, so that one country, powerful country like the US, couldn't basically cut us off from the global economy. So yeah, there are very interesting trade-offs there.
Yeah, maybe a related question. In which way has fintech challenged financial incumbents and changed and have triggered them to respond? And generally speaking, how fintech is changing the flow of finance?
Yes, of course. Incumbents have responded. Incumbents are big banks, big insurance companies, big asset managers that have a lot of money, a lot of cash, a lot of power to borrow and create new money for each other. So they can first generate their own financial technology innovations in-house. Second, they can buy ready-made innovations from fintech by taking over promising fintech companies. And then they can even, they can use these innovations, or you can put these innovations on a shelf to make sure they don't threaten their business model too much. We know this model from the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah? They buy companies to buy patents in order to stop these patents from harming their business and profits. The same happens in green finance. Energy companies, oil companies buy renewable energy companies, small companies. They say, oh, because we want this fantastic technology and scale it up. And often it is to shut it down. So of course, incumbents have a lot of power and are not going anywhere. The revolution is not happening or extremely slow. But still, and fintech fever, well, it's still there, but we see the levels of investment not growing so much as they did during the pandemic. But with AI, with new technologies, yeah, they surely mean change in the financial industry. And maybe not the cryptocurrencies are the main driver of the change, but the distributed ledger technology, the technologies that cryptocurrencies use, which will not necessarily deliver what they promise, a revolution and decentralized finance, but could, for example, lead to a bigger power of technology companies in finance, working in association with big financial companies. We already see that because some of the most powerful financial companies are also very technologically advanced, like BlackRock.
The next question is really related. So what would you say to younger scholars who think about a new research topic? What would be interesting research avenues with regards to AI and financial geography?
I have a simple answer. So one of the topics is maybe it's still open. We in Finance and Space, the journal that we run, we're planning a special issue on decentralized finance. So that's another kind of revolution that many people foresee. And it's quintessentially geographical because this is why it's called decentralized. And this may be a false claim, a completely false claim. So that's a very interesting area to study. And this includes fintech, but many other things, central bank digital currencies, and many other things. So that's the combination of technology and finance that I would study. And because what we see is, well, finance, technology are, I would say, the most powerful industries of the last 30 years of all industries. And now they're converging. So imagine what the combination can bring. Yeah, it can really be a game changer.
And then there is another question, and so far the final question. Do you plan to include more African countries in the map?
Oh, yes.
Or do you have maybe somewhere in the book maps that focus specifically on Africa?
Yes, we have maps on Africa, including the M-Pesa and the payment systems in Kenya. Of course, in the struggle to make the atlas geographically representative and make it a proper atlas, yeah, we were looking for data on Africa. Of course, the global maps always have African coverage, and I must admit, though, that it remains a challenge to find comparable data on African countries on many topics. But this is another area that I would recommend that people go and study through mixed methods. This is, for example, what we're doing now, studying fintech in Africa, doing interviews and data, combining them. And I know Franziska is also doing research on that.
Well, there are no other questions in the chat. And given the time, I think we are already at the end of the session, it seems. Time is flying. There's one final question. It has been popping up multiple times. How can I get a book, and especially a book with your signature?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They want signed books.
So, yes, I have an answer. I'm happy to say the book is not terribly expensive. In the UK, with a discount code that I have, you can email me. You can buy it for £25. You can buy it online for about the equivalent of £30 around the world. And it's much bigger than A4. So you get the, I hope you would feel you get value for money. And in terms of signature, I've never been asked for many autographs on my books, but I'm happy to do that. And the best occasion will be a second global conference on financial geography happening in Singapore at the end of February. Just look it up. It will be here at the National University of Singapore. And if you bring the atlas with you, I guarantee I will not only sign it, I will write a dedication.
That sounds promising. Well, I think that's everything from the side of the participants, and no further questions. So I would say we are closing the session by, first of all, thanking you, Derek, for sharing your expertise with us today. I found it really, really insightful and very interesting. So thank you very much. But also, I would like to thank everyone who attended and contributed to the discussion. Thank you so much for all your questions. And then last but not least, of course, also a special thanks goes to the Regional Studies Association for hosting this event. And that being said, I wish everyone a very nice rest of the day, depending on where you are. This is more or less, but have a nice rest of the day, and I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.